Derech HaShem. Okay. We are in Chelek Daled, that's part 4 of Derech HaShem. And we are in the middle of chapter Daled, chapter 4, which is about Kriya Shema. The very first, so far we covered maybe about half of the chapter, which, believe it or not, was all under paragraph Aleph, number 1. And we're now up to paragraph Beis, number 2. As I'm looking, we're not halfway through the chapter. We're much less than that. This is a longer chapter. We're about a quarter of the way through. But so far, the Ramchal has shared something very fascinating. He explained, number 1, why is Shema so important? We make such a big deal about Shema. What's so important about it after all? And he explained the idea of Yichud HaShem. Shema Yisrael Hashem Echad, that God is one. That is critical and central in Judaism. And he explained that idea to be something much, much deeper than what we're used to. It doesn't simply mean that we believe in one God and no idols. Something much, much deeper, that a concept of everything in the world can be traced back to Hashem, essentially. That everything in the physical realm and in the spiritual realm, all existence exists because Hashem wills it, and everything's ability, it only is granted that ability because Hashem wills it to have that power, have that ability. So in that sense, everything is the one Hashem, because nothing really exists outside of Hashem. That was, in a nutshell, what we covered last time, and that's what the Shema is focused on. And we say it twice a day because there's 2 different parts to a day. You know, Hashem runs the world in such a way that there are 2 different parts. And that was the other point that we saw, which is why we have the Shema in the day and the Shema in the night. Okay, so let's continue now with paragraph Beis in Derech Hashem. And again, we are in Chelek Daled, part 4, Perek Daled, chapter 4, in paragraph Beis, number 2. The next thing that we need to understand, we need to discern, is that the Creator, blessed be He is king, master over all of creation. The explanation of this is, the truth of his existence, it is something that doesn't depend on anything else. And it is not connected to anything else. Hashem himself is unique, and that his existence is intrinsically necessary, and it is not related or dependent on anything else. Not above, not below. Excuse me. There's no cause and effect when it comes to Hashem's existence. Everything else that exists in this world, there's a certain degree of cause and effect. Certain things occurred to bring something about, right? A mother and a father have a child. That's how we all came into being, right? There's different cause and effect, but Hashem is not governed by any of that, nor by nor with joining with a partnership. In this way, we refer to God with the name Elokim. That name Elokim refers to the fact that Hashem's existence is one that is intrinsically necessary. As we've mentioned, the Amnam because Hashem wants and he creates creations. The Kulam Tuluyim Bo b'Mitziyusah. Excuse me, and they all depend on him in their existence. In all of their ways. In this regard, Hashem is referred to as the master of all. Everything comes from him. Everything is his. And he is in control of everything according to his will. So far, that aspect of Hashem is kind of where the name Elokim and the title Adon HaKol, Master of All, that's where it all comes from. V'ulam od ratza b'tuva v'chazdo. On the other hand, Hashem also willed in his goodness and kindness lahashpio kaviyachol ba'anvaso as rum kvodo, to lower, in a certain sense, his with great humility, the loftiness of his honor, and to have a relationship with his creations. Even though in reality, intrinsically, they have no relationship with Hashem directly. I added that word. They have no relationship with Hashem. Hashem wanted there to exist a relationship between himself and his creations, similar to that of a king to its nation. That he should be considered to them as their head, ulamanhig, as their leader, and to be honored through them, just like a king is honored to its nation. As the pasuk says, the greater the nation, the greater the glory to the king. And in this regard, Nikra'ehu Malko Shel Olam. He's referred to as the king of the world. Vina Bechina Zo, in this regard, Hu Nashav Lanu L'Rosh, he's considered our head, Miskabed Banu. It's also only because of this relationship that Hashem wanted that there's such a thing as serving Hashem. I love to listen to him, the Kol Asher Yitzav, whatever he commands, like a king to his nation. So let's just pause for a second. I think the Ramchal said something here very, very big, very profound. And if we don't stop and pay attention to it, it's going to slip right by. What the Ramchal is pointed out is that there's a fascinating reality that in the intrinsic essence of God, we have nothing to do with him, nothing at all. God is totally independent of everything else in creation. And he is in total control of everything in creation, without any input from anything else. And really, by right, we should have no relationship with Hashem. As anti-Judaism as that sounds, technically speaking, the nature of God is such that we as his creations should have no relationship by his intrinsic essence. Writes the Ramchal, even though that is true, but Hashem willed it to exist. Hashem, so to speak, added a layer to creation. And Hashem said, listen, I want there to exist a relationship. I want my creations to be connected to me in some way. And the way Hashem fashioned that relationship is to mimic, or maybe not to mimic, this is perhaps the prototype, but it's the model of nation to king. He's the king, he's the sovereign, and we are his nation. We are aware of him, and we turn to him, and we look to him for guidance, for leadership, and for sustenance. Just like a nation depends on their king for leadership and for guidance, and to manage the affairs of the kingdom and the well-being of the kingdom. That is the relationship that exists between creation and God. But the point I want to stress is that it's not something that was essential to creation. It wasn't something that was natural, quote unquote, automatic. It was something that God had to, so to speak, go out of his way to will it to exist. Okay, let's continue. In this regard, we also have an obligation to recognize him every single day, and to uphold his kingdom over us, and to subject ourselves to him and to his decrees, like servants to a king. This is what we refer to as Kabbalas ol Malchus Shemayim, accepting the yoke of the kingdom of heaven. Fancy words, but they mean something. They mean this simple idea that we accept God as our king. That's, and that exact whatever you envision as a king to a nation, we accept God as our king over us in that regard. This component is a second aspect which is included in Shema Yisrael. The Hainu, that is, admitting, confessing to this truth, that he is the king of kings, who rules over all of his creations, above and below, and accepting the yoke of his kingdom, and subjecting ourselves to him, as we have mentioned. That is the second element that exists in Shema. So essentially what's happening is the Ramchal spent the beginning of the chapter explaining the idea of Yichud HaShem, that God is one. And that is one aspect of Shema. Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. The second aspect of Shema that he's now introducing to us is the idea of Kabbalas ol Malchus Shemayim, accepting God as the sovereign, as the ultimate king. And that is presumably captured in the words Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu. God is Elokeinu. Hashem is our God. And we'll see if he embellishes on the words more. Okay, let's continue now with paragraph Gimel number 3. From these concepts, there results a tremendous, very, very big results for the correction, the fixing up of the entire creation. This is ki ulam sidrei habriya v'chonin yoseh misudarim b'derech. All of the orders and the systems that have been arranged in creation have been arranged in such a way shekasher malchut yisbarach shmo nudas umodim ba kol bruav nimsa v'abruim kol tov v'chol shalva. That when Hashem's kingdom, his kingship, is known and it is admitted to, it's agreed upon by all of his creations, the result is that amongst all of his creations, what is found is goodness and tranquility. V'abracham is rabbeis, and blessing is multiplied by him. U'shlomim is gadil, their peace is increased. U'behisparet ha'avadim. Okay, let's pause there. That's the other half of the coin. So the Ramchal is saying that Hashem set up the world in a way that when we accomplish this, when the world recognizes God as king, everything works. Everything works the way it's supposed to work. And the world all of a sudden becomes filled with goodness, filled with blessing, filled with peace, filled with tranquility, all of those things that we want, all of those things that make life enjoyable and pleasant. That's what fills the world. So let's continue. We'll dwell on the other side of things after hearing the Ramchal describe it.
Rabbi Alt.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
I mean, it seems here that he's addressing all mankind,
Yes,
but only Jews are required to say Shema.
excellent. Yeah, that's an excellent point. Excellent point. And I think that you're right. He is addressing the entire world. I think the simple answer is, I think there's two parts to this answer. I think they're related to each other. One part to the answer is the idea of or legoyim, excuse me, that we are supposed to lead the way. We're supposed to set the example for the world. And if we're doing our job to its fullest, all of the entire Jewish people, it will make an impression that the world will follow suit. That's one half of the coin. The other half of the coin, I think, is that a shift occurred in creation with Avraham Avinu. This is something that the Ramchal dealt with in the beginning of the book, where creation was originally designed in such a way that all of mankind equally shared the burden, the responsibility, and the opportunity, all are accurate descriptions, of serving HaShem and kind of fulfilling our potential. As mankind wandered further and further astray, and Avraham Avinu was the one man to kind of get things right and return to the mission of mankind, there was a shift and a focus that took place in all of creation, where the mission of mankind became focused on the Jewish people, where the mission of mankind now is the primary responsibility falls on the shoulders of the Jewish people, because Avraham Avinu kind of took on that role as the one person that's got it right. And then his future generations kind of continued in that mission. So, so getting back to your question, even though it's true that what he's describing now is really the job of all of mankind, it has become focused on the Jewish people in its fulfillment. But let's be clear that the ultimate, the end of days, it's very clear that in the end of days, it will be a reality of all of mankind. All of mankind, the world will not reach its totality, its completion, until the end of days, when all of mankind recognizes HaShem Elokeinu, HaShem Echad, that there's one God and that He's the master of all. So you're correct in what you picked up on that. Okay, let's continue. When the servants are scattered, and they are not serving, and they're not accepting God's kingdom, kol toiv chaser, all goodness is missing. Darkness becomes strengthened. Evil reigns. Period. So that's the flip side of things. Yeah. Behold, this way of Hashem, it follows through in all areas of creation. Above and below, those that act and those that are acted upon, as I mentioned above in the beginning of the work. However, that the reality of whether God is known or not known, that is a result of man's actions. The harmony, the peace, the goodness that exists in the world or the lack thereof, that is something that Hashem put in place as a result of whether he's known or not. But whether he's known, that's our job. That depends on human action. These things have been explained in their place. What we need to focus on now for the topic that we're currently discussing, which is Shema. If there will come some reason for Hashem to bestow whenever any reason exists for the Creator to manifest himself in his kingdom and rule over his world. Okay, if there'll be some reason why Hashem has to sort of make himself known, he's got to do something to show himself as the king. That will bring about tremendous goodness, tremendous tranquility, to all of creation. There'll be an increase of illumination in the world, of sanctity and purity, all goodness. The powers of evil, they will be bent over, they will be subjected. They will not be able to corrupt the goodness of the world. The imlo, and if that's not the case, when Hashem does not want to show his kingdom, Hashem will hide himself. He won't reveal the strength of his rule. The kochos aram is parts of the sholten, and then the powers of evil will be increased. The Kol told us that all the results of this, they will exist, they'll be prevalent in all the places that they are relevant. This includes all the evils that exist in the world. Okay, so let's pause.
Wait a minute. This is kind of an odd way of saying things. It's like saying if God holds back and hides himself and holds back his powers, then evil things come out instead and break out and rule. But that's like saying there's something else, God forbid, besides Hashem. Whereas I'm understanding that if people, like in the beginning of this, more toward the middle of this paragraph, where it says, Kol Tov Chaser, and the Choshek Mitzkaber, we said before, he named him Shachim Darchei Hashem Ela. In other words, we're pulling out we're tapping something different from Hashem, which is not good, which is still Hashem, as opposed to he's hiding his face, and therefore some other, like other religions where they have, well, if God pulls away, then something else takes over.
Right. So
as opposed to you're getting one side versus the other.
Yeah. Yes, I hear your question, and I hear where you're seeing that in the language that he uses in the previous paragraph that we just did. But I was understanding, despite that language, that he's continuing with the same theory, with the same construct, that it's all coming from Hashem, and it's a cause and effect that he has set into place in the creation of the world, that when his kingship is known, it brings about goodness. When his kingship is hidden, it brings about evil and bad. he does mention these kochos hara, which does sound like some other power. But I think the answer is that it's a power that he created and that he programmed to operate this way, not something that is operating independent of Hashem. That's my assumption. What do you think about that, Dr. Horowitz?
Like Sitra Achra.
Right, yeah, exactly.
Somehow the energy is going to get there, and whether it gets there good or bad, it's going to get there.
Right. Right, I hear you. Another thing that's interesting is that he said in the beginning that whether Hashem is known in the world or not is dependent on the actions of man. Now it sounds like he's saying that there is a second component. It's possible that Hashem at some point in history will have a need to express himself. The thing that comes to mind is like the 10 plagues in Egypt, the splitting of the sea. And then there'll be points in history where God has to hide himself, where it's very hard to tell that there is a God. Things that come to mind are, the Holocaust or other, Jewish tragedies. So it's almost.
Just to take an aside in that, I think that's the opposite. That's the opposite of Hester putting it in a certain way. That who would have thought that in less than a decade, the Jewish civilization of Europe would be totally dismantled and moved elsewhere? Who would have thought?
Interesting.
I mean, it's something which is magic, obviously, but it's also almost miraculous that out of nowhere, this leader who would have amounted to nothing some other time in history is lifted up, runs a big country, destroys the world, destroys the Jewish presence, Jewish lives in Europe, and as soon as he's done, he's gone.
Yes, that's a fascinating point.
So it's like like Hashem intervened, but not in a way that we would have liked to have seen if we had the choice.
Right. Yeah. No, I hear your point. It's very clearly the hand of God. If you think about, I never thought about that point, that he literally rose to power
Out of nowhere.
And disappeared.
When the job was done.
Is right. Literally just to do this one job.
The same thing with communism.
That's interesting. What's your example there?
Well, one day it's gone. One day, 1989, the wall's down.
Interesting. Just kind of came and went.
Tehillim Lamed Zion, there's a pasuk like that.
What's the
Look around,
pasuk?
it's not going to be there.
Interesting. Okay, let's get back to Shema. So here comes the Ramchal. So this is the idea. This is how Hashem set up the world. That when His kingship is when His kingdom is known, that triggers goodness. When the knowledge of God's kingship is hidden, that triggers bad. Hine, being that the Jewish people strengthen this every single day, and we accept upon ourselves God's kingdom, and we admit to it in our heart and in our mouths. Hashem bestows in His world, and the powers of evil become weakened under those of good. And blessing is brought to the world. When we testify to God's oneness, as we mentioned above, umachziko, most of the olam tikun al tikun. So connected this, like in line with this, parallel to this, we are answered, and we are raised up in that oneness of Hashem and the strengthening of it, and that adds more and more levels of perfection, of completion, of correction to the world. In the degree of the true correction, as we've mentioned. She'elim is galgulim kol mesibos hanhaga mekayim atzaso she ha'amid habriya ala tov hasholim k'mish zachar. So this brings about, this kind of gets the wheels turning. It's galgulim kol mesibos hanhaga, all the processes of Hashem's orchestrating of the world. It's a fulfillment of Hashem's eights, of his plan, his advice, just to uphold the world for goodness, complete goodness, as we've mentioned. Okay, so basically the Ramchal is taking the ideas that he's explained so far, and he's saying that what we're seeing here is that Shema, this simple little Shema Yisrael that we're doing twice a day, is central to keeping the world running, literally. That the fact that there's a nation on earth that twice daily is recognizing and declaring Hashem's oneness, Hashem's kingdom, that is what keeps whatever level of blessing and goodness there is in the world, that keeps the world running. That's where it comes from. It comes from Shema.
But it's not all Jews. I mean, it's a minority of Jews that are doing that.
Right. That's also true. So that might be why we're lacking a lot of goodness. I don't know. I'm a little hesitant to say it, but the world is not perfect right now. I say especially. I think the whole COVID thing's a little overrated in my opinion. But there's plenty of things that are not working properly in this world. Plenty more room, let's say it that way, plenty more room for more blessing and more goodness. So that very possibly could be because of this exact point. Those who recognize this critical facet to reality is not only one nation, but it's also a small minority within that one nation. Yeah, 100%. And just for the record, something that I think is just an irony that exists is that conservative and Reform Judaism, more conservative, I think, than Reform, but they're very focused on tikkun olam, right? I'm sure you've heard those words. Tikkun olam, we're going to fix the world. What does that mean to them? It means social justice, and it means environmentalism, right? We're going to fix the world. We're gonna make sure that we save the trees and we save the polar bears, and we're gonna get rid of all the bigots and racists in the world, right? Tikkun olam. We're gonna fix the world. That's their concept of tikkun olam. The irony is that the reality of tikkun olam, the way God designed the world, is that it's supposed to be brought about through Shema Yisrael.
They left out the Malchus Shakai part of the Tikkun Olam.
Right. There, it sounds from the Ramchal that the way that the world is designed is that our job is not to directly pursue Tikkun Olam. Our job is to say Shema and mean it, to be Mekabel Malchus Shemayim, to accept God as King, to accept God as one, and to let the world do what it was designed to do when we are doing our part in that regard.
Well,
Um,
if the rabbi doesn't mind my interrupting him, and
Go ahead.
when we talk about things that are tikkun olam, we are talking to a certain extent about social justice and business justice and so forth. Let's say if I find your wallet and give it back to you, and you say, uh, there was $200 in there, there's only $100 now, I'm taking you to Basin, and they're going to make me swear. There's a tikkun olam is you can't, I don't have to swear.
Okay, very good, very good. So
So
there's a
I mean,
concept.
as I like the idea, there is an idea of social justice in tikkun olam, but it's basically protecting people from injustices that would happen if the strict law were done somehow.
Right. Okay, excellent. So I'm glad you
Or
bring that up.
being Marat's or accepting a korban and you have no idea. Maybe somebody stole the animal you bought before you bought it, but you can still bring it for a korban. Don't have to worry about it. Otherwise,
Right.
nobody ever do anything.
Right. Okay. So Dr. Horowitz is bringing up an important point that if you in Shas, in the Talmud, in Mishnah, you'll come across an idea of tikkun olam, and what it always means is some type of rabbinic intervention, some type of rabbinic law that was put in place to essentially protect society, to keep things working properly, to, the example that Dr. Oates gave of the wallet that was found, according to the letter of the law, if you find a wallet and the owner claims there was $200 and you say, no, there was only 100, you're required by the Torah to make a shvuah, to make an oath, which most people don't want to do. So that created a problem that
Who wants to bring back a wallet?
no one's returning wallets. Seriously, that's what was happening. No one in their right mind that finds a wallet with some money in it is going to come forward, because I don't want to deal with this whole problem. I don't want to end up in a bezdin and then have the rabbis tell me I have to take an oath with all this scary stuff that happens when someone takes an oath. I don't want to bother with that. So their tikkun olam was that they created a rabbinic law that in that scenario he's not obligated to swear. But what I would like to highlight is that there's the Ramchal's tikkun ha'olam and there is the tikkun ha'olam of Shas. The Ramchal's tikkun ha'olam is in the real essential sense of the world meeting its completion, the evils of the world melting away and there existing goodness in the world. That's the Ramchal. The Gemara, I don't know if I would call it social justice, because we don't find that phrase being used regarding protecting minorities or those types of examples. We find it in terms of making things work. You know what I mean? It's so that a person shouldn't be, the exact example you gave, I think, is very, very telling. A person shouldn't be prevented from doing what he's supposed to do, of returning a wallet. That's where they stepped in to adjust things. I think the tikkun ha'olam of Shas is also not the way it's used by the conservative and reform movement. It's something very different. It's rabbinic intervention to kind of make things work properly within society and within fulfillment of the Torah. Okay, let's drop more to finish off paragraph Gimel and to get up to paragraph Dalet, and then we'll hold it there because we're already at 43. So what you need to understand about this, she'ein kol advarim ha'ela amurim ela sheyeh tikun habriya mitzad bnei ha'adam v'lo me'elav. What you need to understand from this is that we're not talking about, what we're talking about here is the world being corrected through mankind, and not on its own. The way the world operates has already been arranged and established in this way. All of its processes are leading to completion, to perfection, the ultimate completion. This is what HaShem set into place through his goodness and his strength. However, through the decree of Hashem's wisdom, he established that it should be done through man's actions. Because then the people, the humans, the man who perform this, who do this job, will be completed as well. And then that completion of the world will be in its ultimate. Where the creations become masters of their own perfection. This was the idea that we had in the very beginning of the Sefer, the idea that we need to earn our reward, because then we're the owners of our own perfection. This is really the ikar. This is the primary point of all of what we've discussed. That which Hashem has established with this process of completion and perfection through his creations, Yushlam v'yetza the po'al yidei b'nei adam. It should happen through mankind. In order that they should be completed and perfected in the way that is fitting for them. Okay, so the Ramchal here is really saying a mouthful in one short little end of a paragraph. And I just want to embellish a drop because I happen to be aware of a different work of the Ramchal called Das Tzfuna. Das Tzfunos is a different sefer that the Ramchal wrote, which I have not had a chance to study it in depth, but what I do know is that the focus of the sefer is the idea that there exists a dichotomy in the creation, that God has a master plan, regardless of what man chooses to do. God has a master plan. He wants the world to come to a certain completion, a certain stage of completion and perfection. Simultaneously, God arranged things in a way that man is granted free will, and man is given the ability, the power, the responsibility to bring that about, to move the world along in that direction. But it's almost like two tracks that Hashem has somehow linked to bring this about. So I think that's what's happening here in this last paragraph, is what the Ramchal is saying, that this idea that we're realizing that Shema is kind of like the core of this mission. It's part of a big picture. It's part of a master plan that God has of bringing the world to its completion, but he put it into the hands of man for the sake of man becoming the owners of our perfection and of our completion. That's the idea. Okay, let's hold it.
But isn't that a paradox? I mean, he's saying...
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Which is why the Ramchal dedicated an entire book to this one paradox. And meaning, let me give you another minute to express yourself. What exactly is the paradox?
That it's all in God's hands. He's controlling everything, but we have the power to move forward and do good.
Perfect. Yes. That is. So essentially what you're saying is God has a master plan. He has his own plan of how he wants things to happen. And simultaneously, he gave us free will. Excuse me, if he gave us free will, doesn't that mean that I can choose not to go with the program, not to fulfill what's on the schedule? Right. That is a paradox which is addressed by the Ramchal and Das Tzfunos. And I definitely cannot do that justice, without studying that safer in depth. But that is a paradox that the Ramchal does address. And that is kind of what he's touching on right here without pointing out that it's really a paradox that he's tiptoeing around. But thank you, Paul, for bringing that out, because that's an important point.
Like
Okay,
going it's like going against the flow of traffic.
Sorry?
It's like going against the flow of traffic. You're in the traffic, and if you can go with the flow, or you can go against the flow and cause all sorts of disruption, but the traffic's still going to flow.
Right.
It's just
Yeah.
your role in it is going to be a disruption that has to be other people have to work around.
Right. People have to drive around you, get to move you off to the side, whatever it is. Yeah. That's a good muscle. Okay. Alrighty, Shukayach, everyone have a wonderful night. Thank you for joining.
Thank you.
Next